Hello, welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Amarachi Ubani. The headlines this morning. UN chief to meet Russia's president amid World War III threat from Russia. Britain to send Stormer armored vehicles to Ukraine. And US comic book stars raise money for Ukraine's refugees. A warm welcome again. And we begin with that scheduled meeting by the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, expected to happen any time now in Moscow. Expectations are, however, low, as it will not be the first of diplomatic efforts aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. Mr. Guterres will be meeting with the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, and talks are expected to focus on the besieged city of Mariupol, where despite declaring a victory, Russian forces have failed to take the Azovstal steelworks plant. Ukraine forces said earlier today that Russia continued to blockade its units at the plant. Ukraine has asked Guterres to guarantee a humanitarian corridor to evacuate civilians sheltering inside Azovstal. The UN chief is also expected to travel to Kyiv on Thursday, where he will be meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky. The US has set to kick off Ukraine-related defense talks with dozens of countries today, with US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin playing host in Germany. But here's the thing, Russia is warning there is a serious risk of World War III. More on that later. But back in the United Nations, Russia's deputy ambassador to the world body, Dmitry Polyanskiy, says there's no point having a ceasefire in Ukraine at this stage because Kyiv is likely to use it as an opportunity to try to discredit Russia after denying it reached an agreement with Moscow over a humanitarian corridor. Ukraine had earlier denied reaching a deal with Russia on evacuating civilians from the Azovstal steel plant in the southern city of Mariupol, saying the United Nations should be the initiator and guarantor of any such deal. Polyanskiy says a ceasefire would only be an opportunity for Ukraine to regroup and stage more provocations.
President Putin has...
We are not supposed to comply with the calls. People comply with the orders, but not with the calls. So there was a call for ceasefire, and we opened humanitarian corridors which are not being used by Ukraine, and Ukraine is also compromising our efforts to open these corridors. So we don't think that ceasefire is a good option right now, because the only advantage it will give possibility for Ukrainian forces to regroup and to stage more provocations like Bucha, like I called to you. So frankly, it's not up to me to decide, but I don't see any reasons in this right now. Everyone who wants to get evacuated, for example, from Mariupol, has the opportunity to do so because we opened humanitarian corridors. Today it was also opened. They claim that there are some civilians in this Azovstal, but they do not let them go. I don't see any logic in this.
Ambassador, Turkey has offered to serve as a guarantor. Is there any chance that Russia would accept that in terms of a ceasefire?
Frankly,
is there a role for the UN?
I am not aware of the details.
Is there a role for the UN in any ceasefire?
There is a role for everybody who really can convince Ukraine to adopt the decisions that will be for the benefit of this country. But there is not a role for anybody who would try to use ceasefires and other things to strengthen the positions of Ukrainian army and to stage more provocations, directly or indirectly. We saw initiatives on ceasefire which resulted in 2 provocations in Bucha and Kramatorsk. So I don't see any reasons to believe in the sincerity of the other side anymore. But again, it's not up to me to decide. It's Ministry of Defense and Presidential Administration, of course.
The Russian ambassador to the UN there answering questions at a press briefing. In the meantime, Britain has promised to send a number of Stormer armored vehicles fitted with launchers for anti-air missiles to Ukraine. The UK's Defense Secretary Ben Wallace said this much to MPs on Monday, adding the British assessment showed that around 15,000 Russian personnel have been killed in the conflict, while 2,000 armored vehicles, including some 530 tanks, have been destroyed along with 60 helicopters and fighter jets. Wallace says Ukraine needs more long-range artillery ammunition as well as anti-ship missiles to counter Russian
Ukraine
ships.
Needs more long-range. 31st of March. It is our assessment that approximately 15,000 Russian personnel have been killed during their offensive. Alongside the death toll or the equipment losses, and in total, a number of sources suggest that to date, over 2,000 armoured vehicles have been destroyed or captured. This includes at least 530 tanks, 530 armoured personnel carriers, and 560 infantry fighting vehicles. Russia has also lost over 60 helicopters and fighter jets. And I can now announce to the House that we shall be gifting a small number of armoured vehicles fitted with launchers for those anti-air missiles. These Stormer vehicles will give Ukraine forces enhanced short-range anti-air capabilities both day and night. These next 3 weeks are key. Ukraine needs more long-range artillery and ammunition, and both Russian and NATO caliber types to accompany them. They also seek anti-ship missiles to counter Russian ships that are able to bombard Ukrainian cities. Mr. Speaker, it is therefore important to say that, if possible, the UK will seek to enable to supply each weapons. I shall keep the House up to date and also members of each front bench across the House as we proceed. We have temporarily doubled the number of defensive personnel in Estonia, sent military personnel to support Lithuania intelligence, resilience and reconnaissance efforts, deployed hundreds of Royal Marines to Poland, and sent offshore patrol vessels and Navy destroyers to the eastern Mediterranean. We've also increased our presence in the skies over southeastern Europe with 4 additional Typhoons based in Romania. That means we now have a full squadron of RAF fighter jets in southern Europe ready to support NATO tasking.
Well, there's more military aid coming to Ukraine, this time from the United States, as the White House says a new aid is likely to be part of a longer-term package, just like Britain announced, that will require approval from Congress. Last week, U.S. President Joe Biden said he would seek approval from Congress soon for more assistance for Ukraine, after announcing $800 million in military assistance the previous week.
Leadership expect to have consultations and conversations with military leadership and, of course, leadership from the State Department over the course of the coming days. I expect it will be something later in the week and expect it will be a longer-term package or proposal. Well, I would remind you we're continuing to review sanctions. No one is safe from our sanctions. We've already, of course, sanctioned President Putin, but also his daughter, his closest cronies, and we'll continue to review more. So I don't have an analysis at this point because we're still reviewing. There's more we will likely do. I would say it's consistent with our view and the President's view and Secretary Austin's view that we are going to do everything we can to push back on President Putin's aspirations to subsume Ukraine, to take over their territorial integrity and their sovereignty, and aspirations he had as of 2 months ago to go beyond that. I don't have any assessment to offer from here or any particular comment on the mental health of President Putin.
Staying with military aid, the UN crisis coordinator Amin Awad has called for an immediate stop in the fighting in Mariupol to allow civilians trapped there to safely evacuate. During a press briefing in New York, the UN spokesperson, Farhan Haq, said Mr. Awad warned about the thousands of lives already at stake there, saying the call for a ceasefire to allow evacuations is as hostilities continue to escalate.
Turning to Ukraine, the UN crisis coordinator, Amin Awad, yesterday called for an immediate stop in fighting in Mariupol to allow civilians trapped in the besieged city to safely evacuate. Mr. Awad warned that the lives of tens of thousands of people, including children and the elderly, are at stake in Mariupol. The call from the crisis coordinator comes as hostilities in Ukraine are escalating, causing more civilian casualties, impacting key civilian infrastructure across the country, and hampering aid to people stranded in areas with intense fighting, including Mariupol and Kherson. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that according to security reports, airstrikes this morning have destroyed several train stations in the west and north-central Ukraine. During the weekend, shelling impacted several areas around Odessa, Mykolaiv, and Kharkiv. Across the country, and since the war began, the World Health Organization has confirmed more than 160 attacks against health facilities, and the UN Human Rights Office has confirmed that 2,400 civilians have been killed. The actual figures are likely to be much higher. The worsening situation has prompted our humanitarian colleagues to revise the humanitarian flash appeal as they continue to deliver aid to people across Ukraine. More than $2.25 billion is now required for needs inside Ukraine. More than double the amount requested when we launched the appeal on the 1st of March, a few days after the war began. Our colleagues stressed that continued international support will be essential to enable humanitarians in Ukraine to reach those whose lives have been upended by the war.
Back in Russia, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the Ukraine war will end with an agreement, but its content will depend on the military situation there in the country. He made the comment during an interview with Russian state television, adding that Kyiv was only imitating negotiations, according to a transcript published on the Foreign Ministry's website. Let's talk more about the security situation in Ukraine and developments out of the country. Joining me now is security expert Temitope Oludo. He's in London. Temitope, thank you for joining me this morning. And I know it's pretty early, so I do appreciate your being here. So let's begin with what you make of the Russian foreign minister's words. And that came up earlier, in the program. It sort of gives us an idea as to when this war will end. How are you interpreting that? Because he says the war will end with an agreement, but its content will depend on the military situation. How are you reading this?
Thank you so much for having me. I think for many security analysts, it's quite clear that Russia was not fighting Ukraine alone, because it's out there in the public domain, the number of weapons that are being distributed, to Ukraine from many Western countries, and, the support that is provided to them. So it's quite clear that Russia was not fighting Ukraine alone, but they were actually fighting the might of NATO. The only difference was that there is no NATO boots on the ground in terms of physical soldiers on the ground. That's the only difference. But it's quite clear, and that is the reason why, the Russians' position is quite clear. From what we are seeing now in the last few days, that they're trying to carve out, that part of the East that they are actually hitting on. Now we know there's a victory day that is coming in May. Putin will definitely want a situation where he could report to his people about his progress, and they've been hearing sniffings of war going on that they've never. And I think it's significant that for the first time, they are now coming out to say there is a war before they used to say there's a conflict. So we must take this very seriously. But the world community will not allow this to go nuclear. NATO will not want it to go nuclear because a lot of things will be destroyed along that path. And so there would be negotiation. So this is all part of the war propaganda. One group need to continue to stay strong and argue, and we could see that the president of Ukraine have actually come out to say, yes, I want to negotiate with Putin directly. That was not part of the language in the past. So my view is that it is a dangerous situation, but as we get to this point, there will be the escalation, hopefully, because many people will get involved, Israel, Turkey, as they are now. And we've seen that at least today, the United Nations, big bosses going there to have a conversation with them. So let's see how it goes today, and we'll be able to determine what next will happen.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that, Russia is still not referred to this, what do you call the special operation, still refers to it as a special operation. We're the ones calling it a war because we can't in good conscience just say it's just a special military operation. But you do make a point, though, where you say that, NATO is sort of fighting this war by proxy. And, with all of these NATO countries providing military weapons to Ukraine, where's Russia getting its own military weapons? I don't want to believe that, Russia just has a buildup, of military arsenal that is just rolling out into Ukraine. There must be help coming from somewhere.
Definitely, there is no doubt. We know that from information available that was coming out, and that's part of the reason why, some of the Western countries were trying to engage, with China, because there was a time where it was rumors or said that Russia was requesting for certain support from China What we don't know is if there have been all the things that have been destroyed so far have been Russia-made weapons. We've not seen a Chinese-made weapon being destroyed in the theater of war. So we could assume that they've not yet exhausted their weaponry. But that being said, when we look at the scale of the weapons that have been given to Ukraine, we must actually start to understand the destruction that have gone on in that little theater of war, because this is a place where there's more than up to £2 billion worth of equipment that have gone in there, and records equipment are being destroyed. We're seeing them on our TV screens, tanks, we've seen planes that are being downed and all these things. If only our viewers could just imagine if Ukraine did not get just 50% of what have been given to them by the West, they would have been overrun. And that clearly explains why the Russian has taken the view that they are not actually fighting on their own. They are actually fighting the war, because at least we know that Africa is not involved in this war. Certain Asian countries are not involved there. So this is the war between Russia and the West. And this has helped at least the West to know the capacity of Russia outside the nuclear weapon that they have. And this is helping Russia to know at least the kind of enemy that they are facing. Because if Russia could not defeat Ukraine, alone, without NATO coming out publicly, what will happen when NATO get involved? And that's the reason why they are insisting that this might become, might go nuclear very soon. And we're hoping it does not go nuclear.
Yeah, but isn't Russia warmongering? I mean, it's pretty hard to read, President Putin's actions over the last few days. The Foreign Ministry has warned of a threat of a third world war, quite unfounded though, but I mean, this is Russia we're talking about. So, then, Russia has threatened the use of nuclear weapons as well. Do you think, I mean, it's almost like, someone pointing a gun at your head. You don't wait to find out if it's a real gun, of course. You just run, or you do what you have to do to survive. So do you think that Russia is just warmongering in this instance, or, should the rest of the world take Russia even more seriously as it, warns that there could be a world war in the horizon?
All the plans of the West to date has actually failed, if you want to look at it. They've made suggestions of Putin being overthrown through an internal coup or palace coup. That has not happened. There's pride issue here, and when pride gets involved, when pride is put into the cocktail, it becomes quite difficult, to actually understand where the next move will come from. Our prayer is that all the good countries that are standing by as observers, that Russia has not seen as taking side, will come together and call Putin to order, more or less to say, let's keep it at the level at which it is now, and let's try and find a peace out of it. Because if we go nuclear, a lot will be destroyed. A lot has already been destroyed, because Ukraine will never really recover that quickly from this destruction. We've had destruction up to the standard of the Second World War in one country. We're not talking across the world. In one country, everything has been destroyed, the infrastructure, and it's over 30%, 70% of their infrastructure have been destroyed. So the question now is, can we tell what Putin's next move is? Only God could do that, because at this stage, we don't know what Putin's next move is. But we know that there must be people within Russia and out of Russia that are thinking of de-escalating this issue so that it does not go nuclear. And I know all the other countries, UK is going to be one of those countries that is a target, because at the end of the day, they've been in the forefront, and that's the reason why Boris Johnson and the other politicians have been banned from Russia. And that tells you how this is escalated. We need to de-escalate it one way or the other.
Yeah, there are many countries on Russia's target list. There's Germany, there's also the United States. But, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is due in Moscow anytime now. He's supposed to prevail, on the Russian president to end this war. Do you think that this meeting could yield any positive results?
It is our hope that it yields some result, even though it will not stop the war, within 30 minutes of him getting out of there. What it might do is that it will create an opportunity for maybe humanitarian corridors, for those that need, to get out. I know you want to agree to that so that it's not seen as that much of that bully. You will also come out strong to say that those proxies that are helping Ukraine, must back down. So it will come out tough. But the fact that he at least is seeing and is having that conversation, with the UN, Secretary General is a good sign. It shows that at least he's not lost all hope in the United Nations. Because imagine if he loses all hope in the United Nations and he doesn't want to engage with them, then we have a serious problem in our hands. But the fact that at least that corridor, that pathway is still open, shows that there is hope that this issue will be resolved as quickly as possible. And we are hoping that any plan that he has ahead of the Russia celebration in May, of victory, against Nazis and all those things, that he will not over-escalate the issue in order to be able to get something or a bone that he could throw to his people to say, this is what we are doing and we are strong against the world coming against us.
Assuming he does attend, those celebrations. Thank you again, Temitope Olodo. A real pleasure having you on the program this morning.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much.
Coming up after the break. Announces it is dropping all tariffs on goods coming to Britain from Ukraine. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. The EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has been in India this past few days. On Monday, she told a geopolitical gathering Europe would ensure that Russian aggression in Ukraine would result in strategic failure. She condemned Russia's actions in Ukraine, describing what she witnessed on a visit to the Kyiv suburb of Bucha on April 8th, where mass graves have been found. India has refrained from explicitly condemning Russia's invasion while calling for an immediate end to violence. Moscow calls its actions in Ukraine a special military operation.
We see Russia's aggression as a direct threat to our security. We will make sure that the unprovoked and unjustified aggression against Ukraine will be a strategic failure. Images coming from Russia's attack on Ukraine have shocked and are shocking the whole world. 2 weeks ago, I visited Bucha, the suburb of Kyiv, which was devastated by Russian troops as they withdrew from the north of Ukraine. I saw with my own eyes the bodies lined up on the ground. I saw the mass graves. I listened to survivors of atrocious crimes the Kremlin soldiers committed. I saw the scars of bombed schools and resident houses and hospitals. These are severe violations of international law, targeting and killing innocent civilians, redrawing borders by force, subjugating the will of a free people. What happens in Ukraine will have an impact on the Indo-Pacific region. It already has. Countries battered by 2 years of COVID pandemic must deal now with rising prices for grain, energy and fertilizers as a direct result of Putin's war of choice. Thus, the outcome of the war will not only determine the future of Europe, but also deeply affect the Indo-Pacific region and the rest of the world. For the Indo-Pacific region, it is as important as for Europe that borders are respected and that spheres of influence are rejected.
Well, following their visit to Ukraine on Sunday, U.S. Defense Secretary Austin Lloyd was in Germany on Monday. He and Secretary of State Antony Blinken have met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and pledged new assistance worth $713 million for the government and other countries in the region. An extra $322 million in military aid for Ukraine would take the total U.S. security assistance since the invasion to about $3.7 billion. Both men said the fact that they were able to come to Kyiv was proof of Ukraine's tenacity in forcing Moscow to abandon an assault on the capital last month. The U.S. is also announcing it will reopen its embassy in Ukraine. Monday, it announced veteran ambassador Bridget Brink as its new ambassador there. A lot of legwork for the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He has been trying to mediate peace between parties in this war. Monday, he was in Ankara, the Turkish capital, where he held a meeting with President Recep Erdogan. Both leaders reaffirmed their common objective is to end the war as soon as possible and to create conditions to end the suffering of civilians. They agreed to stay in contact to follow up on ongoing initiatives. They also discussed the impact of the Ukraine conflict on regional and global issues, including energy, food, and finance. Russian forces attacked facilities transporting weapons to Ukraine's army in Donbass. The Defense Ministry confirmed that the attack they attacked facilities supplying foreign weapons and other military equipment to Ukrainian army in Donbass with high-precision weapons. The air defense system of Russian forces shot down 13 Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles in multiple settlements in Kharkiv and Kherson, according to the Defense Minister the Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov. In addition, the Russian forces used the Panzer S anti-aircraft gun and missile system to intercept one missile and 18 multiple rocket launcher shells of the Ukrainian army in Chernobyk of Kherson. A Russian defense ministry issued a statement Monday night saying the Russian forces used high-precision weapons to destroy power supply facilities of electric locomotives in 6 railway stations in order to cut off the supply of foreign weapons and military equipment to the Ukrainian forces in Donbass. Citing the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Ukraine's news agency said Russian army launched continuous attacks in eastern Ukraine over the past 24 hours. Well, one of the impacts of those Russian military airstrikes is one that hit a multi-story residential building in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. Firefighters fought hard to put out the blaze. Emergency workers broke into one of the burning apartments as local residents watched on. At least 2 apartments were severely damaged. Ukraine's general staff has said Russia was shelling Kharkiv, its second biggest city. Shelling by the Russian army has intensified over the past few weeks. Moscow describes its actions in Ukraine as a special military operation, denying it is targeting civilians.
Есть? Давай, давай.
Economy has been hit hard, global economy that is, has been hit hard by this war in Ukraine. But Britain has good news for Ukraine's economy. All tariffs on goods coming to Britain from Ukraine under an existing free trade deal will be axed, just to help the economy, according to the British government. London says tariffs would be reduced to zero and all quotas removed following a direct request from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, saying the move would provide a boost for Ukrainian businesses involved in key exports such as barley, honey, tinned tomatoes and poultry. According to the British International Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan, we stand unwaveringly with Ukraine in this ongoing fight and will work to ensure Ukraine survives and thrives as a free and sovereign nation. Britain said currently the average tariff on Ukrainian imports was about 22%. It said the planned change had been offered on a non-reciprocal basis, but Kyiv was likely to match the British action. In the meantime, the ruble has strengthened today, firming past 77 against the euro to a near two-year high, helped by tax payments that companies are due to make this week. And as the market looks ahead to a central bank rate decision on Friday, the ruble gained 3.6% to trade at 77.25 versus the euro, earlier clipping 76.96, its strongest mark since June 2020. The ruble was 3% stronger against the dollar at 73.17, hovering around levels seen before February 24, when Russia sent in thousands of troops into Ukraine. Business correspondent Ini John Mekwa is here. You can unbundle this for us, right?
Yes.
So what exactly are they saying here?
Yeah, so the thing is, with the sanctions on Russia, before now, the ruble had been plunging. You've had the currency reduced, because of the sanctions, corporates pulling out, and then people were trying to leave also. So you had a lot of Russians or residents of Russia trying to get dollar instead of ruble. At a point, ATMs were clogged. I'm sure you've seen those visuals and all of that. Well. Yeah, but over time, it seems that the central bank governor of Russia has really put on a very creative hat. She's been really working around the clock, and we've seen a lot of moves. One of that is the exchange rate policy was changed. So from, I think, about a month now, instead of closing the market at 4:30, so they used to trade, and then at the end, they'll now determine, that's what determines if the ruble has gained or lost, depending on the trade of every day. So that was changed to 3:30, so they had less time, and then they reduced their interest rate, and then they pumped in some money into some sectors. Yesterday with Ladi, we talked about employment opportunities, some money made available. So all of this we see, and then of course the request for ruble instead of dollar for their gas, and then some of other arrangement like currency swap that they're having with India and with China. All of this has given strength to the ruble, even though the IMF is saying this may not be sustainable, that it's kind of artificial, because at this time, the Russia economy is just secluded, is isolated. Yeah. So all they are doing is government efforts trying to pump in efforts and activities into the economy. So it might just be artificial.
So the question is how long this would last.
Exactly,
right?
that's what the IMF is saying, yes.
Yeah. And those sanctions also remain. But trickling down to the common man, how does this interpret in daily living?
Well, daily living, I think in Russia, it's a different life now. I mean, you can just walk into an eatery and get that American eatery that you used to have. You can go to Instagram easily, except you want to use VPN. The aviation sector has been, Russia is rather big, so it's not like us, you can do, flights. Yes, you need, so all of those things have changed. So it's not a very easy time for them now, even though the government there is really making efforts to bring alternative. Yesterday we talked about the issue of Lada, which is a local domestic vehicle model. So what they are trying to do is to remodel it so they only need components from Russia. So that's the kind of life that Russians are seeing now. We still have some corporates there. That's also one of the reasons why the ruble is strengthening. We have some corporate there that are due to pay some taxes this week or this month. So that's part of the reason. But life is not the way it used to be. It takes a lot of adjustment of the mind, adjustments of your taste board, adjustments in living and all that.
Yeah, just wondering, if not for the war, how would the Russian economy have been performing now? I mean, you've watched the trajectory, you've watched the trend. Would the Russian economy have been doing just as well, even without the war?
I believe so, Amarachi. I believe so. Russia has really developed its various sectors. I mean, we are talking about grains now. Bread is expensive now because of Russia. In spite of the fact that Germany or Europe, they are not happy with Russia, they can't stop using Russian gas. You know,
and that hasn't been hit yet.
Exactly.
And I feel that they're just waiting.
Exactly. You have the aluminium, you have, you know, the steel, the gem. Yesterday we talked about diamonds. These guys are strong. I think there's so many lessons that Nigeria should learn from Russia. They have developed a lot of their sectors. I mean, yesterday we had the Minister of Trade go to the UK, and then we had that on the news. And then the mayor there was talking about, the Lord there, I beg your pardon, was talking about the potential in Nigeria. Why do we keep talking about potentials when we can actually harness this potential and make it reality and let it affect your life and affect my life and affect the man on the streets?
Amy, I get a feeling you'll be talking a lot more about this on this morning. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. I just want to give people a taste of what's coming up at 10 o'clock. Thank you again for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And have a great show.
Yeah, thanks.
In just a few minutes, Business Morning. In the meantime, officials of the European Union and the International Monetary Fund have both warned about serious energy crisis and economic impacts that Europe may face for losing Russian natural gas. The EU has slapped a total of 5 rounds of sanctions on Russia since the conflict between Russia and Ukraine erupted about 2 months ago. Those sanctions are aimed at crippling the Russian economy. They've not achieved the desired effect, though, according to analysts. Instead, the blowback of the sanction measures is eating into the European economy, adding to stagflation risks. As EU officials are working a 6th round of sanctions, some officials are particularly concerned about the impact to Europe's energy security from imposing sanctions against Russian energy imports. We have joining us now geopolitical security analyst at SBM Intelligence, Confidence Makari. He's been waiting with us in London. Thank you so much for staying with us, and thank you for your patience. Now, according to, sorry, he's in Lagos. I'm sorry. I just transported you to London virtually. And now, according to PwC CEO survey, among the top worries of CEOs are cybersecurity and geopolitical conflicts. Let's talk about how Nigeria is faring with cybersecurity risks right now, given that that is also an issue with this war going on in Ukraine.
Yeah, the thing about cybersecurity in Nigeria, you should know, is that it's mostly a private sector-led enterprise. We, like you said, PwC did a survey on it. I think the risk, very recently, risk management professionals in Nigeria came together for the outlook for the year and concluded on the same thing. Thankfully, one of the government parastatals were part of the meeting that's talking about Bank of Industry, who was also sent officials down there. But the thing about cybersecurity in Nigeria is that just like we are in the global scheme of things, there economic shocks as well as other things affect us. Cybersecurity is also something that Nigeria is very prone to. As I said earlier, it's something that many private firms have been taking into account. So for the government side, it's not really something that we've seen enough actions towards. There was a House of Reps Select Committee that visited Data 6 in Lagos to try to infuse some kind of, to move government online. There were a whole lot of talks using companies like Galaxy Backbone and several others. But in the grand scheme of things, the whole idea of making Nigeria's cybersecurity risk less in case of a cyber attack has not really been that up and doing. The other day we saw how much saw a report about alleged hacking at the National Identification Management Commission, where data of thousands of Nigerians were left open buckets on the internet. So we've not really made too much progress. Yes, you could say that the government has been very slow about it. Even private organizations have also taken a hit. We saw about a year ago how both the ride-hailing app was hacked. But so in conclusion, what I'm saying is that it's not really been something that a great sensitization has been able to get great results. Yes, the sensitization is there, but the actions have been quite lacking.
Yeah, indeed. And I just want to encourage you to just stay on. We'll take a short break. We'll come back. This conversation continues after. Just stay with us. Welcome back to our continued coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Geopolitical and security analyst at SBM Intelligence, Confidence Macari, is still with me. He was talking about, the geopolitical conflicts and the cyber risks, especially to Nigeria right now. Confidence, those sanctions are playing a big role right now in the commodities markets. Food prices have surged, not just in Ukraine, because of the Ukraine war. These analysts are giving warnings about, what the future could be like. And they're saying we need to be prepared for shortage, a lot of it. What conversations are ongoing regarding, buffering, the impacts of this crisis on food?
Yeah, before the conflicts, we had about 800 million hungry people in 2020, and that number is about to be rising. And before 2020, we had about 100 million more hungry people, which took the number to about 1 billion. So food insecurity has always been existing. It's something driven by conflicts, extreme weather events, pest disease, and everything. So currently, we are talking about the conflicts in Ukraine and its impact on the commodities market. So some of the commodities that are mostly affected are wheat, maize, edible oils, most importantly fertilizer. So most of the discussion has largely been around its impact on wheat. Russia is the world's largest exporter of wheat, accounting for about 18%, which of course is nearly 20% of global exports. And then for 2021, and then you have Ukraine that accounts for about 10%. Now it's important to get into context that they are not the largest producers of wheat. That's China and India, but they are the largest exporters. So about 35% of the world's population relies on wheat. So as the primary staple diet. So it's a very significant shock. So currently, if I'm not mistaken, as about March, we had an inflation on the commodity, which was about 50% higher than in February, and almost 80% higher than just 2021. So also maize is also following that way. Since February 24th, we've seen about 25 to 30% increase in price of maize, which above February levels, which over a year it was. Between last year and now, we've seen a 37% increase. So we have those two important commodities going up. But thankfully, rice is not really affected at the moment because, which of course is quite different from the situation 14, 15 years ago during the last food crisis. So global price of rice is still about 17% lower than it was in January 2021. So there's a little bit of good news there. If you look at shipping through the Black Sea, it stands still and high global wheat prices. So we can still expect countries to sell more wheat. So in terms of preservation of food, I think we still have a little bit of good news. So we don't really have that much of a global wheat shortage fall. I think it's what we currently have is a supply issue. So I do think that there's not wheat on the planet, and then the planting season in the summer would, I think, take up much of the production for other countries that are looking to export, to countries like India and China that I've mentioned. So the thing is, many countries will have to adjust. So for instance, if you have a country like Nigeria that depends on Ukraine and Russia for its wheat imports, it has to start looking at external exporters. But that's for the commodities, the food commodities. For the fertilizer, it's another question entirely. We're seeing countries like India and its neighbors not coming out outrightly to condemn Russia's invasion because of how much they depend on the urea NPK from Russia. So it's not all that doom and gloom. Russia and Belarus account for 20% of the global fertilizer exports, and you already know that before the war, 20% before the war, global fertilizer exports were already high because of high oil prices and the price of urea. So it's not exactly that much of a bad news. On one hand, we have some good news in terms of some commodity crops, but I do think that when we get to the middle of the year, we start seeing a lot more other alternatives. The initial shocks we had was because many people were taking on our wares and we were unable to prepare for such eventuality. So by the middle of the year, I think we will start having a lot of backup. So inflation would, I think, go down considerably.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, the climate change may also play a role in the impact on food around the world. With many days of rain predicted for Nigeria, I know the planting season might be a little of a challenge. But let's talk about oil prices now, which have remained volatile, but they're still away from the previous highs. What's your outlook for the oil market? The demands, the complaints seem to wane on the market, right?
Yeah, the thing about oil prices is that there are some people that are going to get a windfall for it, but Nigeria is actually not among the list of those countries because of obvious reasons like fuel subsidy, debates, and several other things. But I think throughout the entirety of this invasion, and perhaps going into May 6th, that the Russians hope to wrap the whole special military operations, as you call it, up, I think oil prices will continue to remain high. There's a pattern here. Each time there is a Russian involvement in the war, outside this war as well, we've always had oil from at least $85 per barrel. The Russian invasion of Georgia in 2008, South Ossetia War, the one in Syria, and several others, and then this one in Ukraine have always ushered in high oil prices. So this one in Ukraine is not really different, and I think it's going to continue to remain in that particular area between 90 and 100. But even beyond oil, there is an even more urgent conversation around gas. So as the European Union continues to look for ways to diversify its options away from Russian energy, we are seeing more actors come into the picture. People like Algeria and perhaps Nigeria. But the thing is, we don't export as much gas as Algeria does, and Algeria is closest to Europe between both countries. So we're seeing Algeria and some other countries take the initiative. But if this was to continue, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more countries like Nigeria and Algeria entering into the partnership that already exists to leverage on the situation to export more gas to Europe.
So we already established that the global economy has been impacted by this war, so has Nigeria as well. But what sort of policies should the policymakers in Nigeria be doing to help protect the economy from these shocks?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that the economies that are most vulnerable to external shocks are the ones that are export dependent. Nigeria's primary exports is oil, and then some sort of its. If you compare oil with other forms of exports, it fails largely in comparison. So on paper, Nigeria is not necessarily supposed to be feeling much impact on external shocks. But looking at the import side, given that we import a lot of things, and some of the other people who produce some of these things also have been impacted by the invasion of Ukraine, we would have to be looking basically at producing some of these things we import. I will look at fertilizer, for instance, as my sole example for this discussion. There was an agreement between Nigeria and Morocco to set up fertilizer production plants in Nigeria within the last 1 year. But over the past few weeks, we've not really seen that initiative materialize. And to be honest, we do not exactly think that Morocco's fertilizer plants in Nigeria is going to cover up for what we get from far away Eastern Europe. But at least it should be a step. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that much activity surrounding that area. So if push comes to shove to insulate the Nigerian economy from the problem of getting fertilizer, urea, NPK, and the rest of them because of what's happening in Eastern Europe, you could also partner with, you could also get similar initiatives like the one you got in Morocco, with other fertilizer producing economies to, well, if not necessarily set up shop in Nigeria, at least to facilitate easy transportation of fertilizer into the country. Right. So one of the key ways of insulating somebody, an economy from shock, is by getting a lot of other options. And yes, the options exist. We've seen it with Nigeria in terms of arms imports when in 2014, the US refused to sell weapons because, when he told Israel to not sell Cobra helicopters to the Nigerian government, he simply looked east to Pakistan, Russia, and China to get its weapons. And then in the Buhari administration, it's changed course and went back to the US. And so the US is not willing to sell, the East will be willing to sell.
Confidence.
We should also adopt the same approach by trying not to hedge our bets on one person.
Confidence. Thank you so much. I mean, you have broken it all down for us, and really appreciate your being with us this morning. Thank you again for joining us on the program.
Thank you once again for having me.
Well, Ukrainian Youth League soccer player Alan Osei says he's excited to help the war-torn country through a charity match with Borussia Dortmund, where he's currently playing as a guest player. Today, Borussia Dortmund and Dynamo Kyiv will play a charity match at Dortmund Signal Iduna Park Stadium, with tickets proceeds going to Ukrainian refugees. And before Osei fled the war, he played for Veres Rivin on loan from Dynamo Kyiv. 2 months ago, he came to Germany and joined Dortmund as a guest player. While now safe in Germany and away from the war, Osei says he maintains regular contact with people in Ukraine, many of whom are still going through very difficult situations, including some on the front lines. Well, he has taken us out on superhero level, just like Batman forming the Justice League of Superheroes, or Iron Man helping to assemble Avengers. Comic book editor Scott Dunbier needed to put together a team of stars. A call went out, and Dunbier quickly signed up the biggest names in the U.S. comic book industry to collaborate on a special anthology to raise money for Ukraine war refugees. The result is Comics for Ukraine, Sunflower Seeds, a 96-page book produced by the best writers, artists, colorists, letterers, designers and editors that Dunbier could find. Those proceeds, estimated to reach $200,000 to $500,000, will go to Operation USA, a Los Angeles-based disaster relief agency raising money for Ukrainian war refugees.
So comics have always sort of been, on the side of trying to do some kind of social good. And whether or not they have any real impact, I mean, that's open for debate, but the point is, I guess their heart is in the right place. So certainly when they asked me, it was like, yeah, I mean, I'm in. So when they called me up and they said, do you want to be part of this? It's like, immediately the wheels start turning. It's like, okay, I despise Putin. It's like, I want to do something that could, help again, if only marginally. And then like I said, the wheels just start, the hamsters get loose. And again, the squirrels are running amok in the attic, and it's like, oh, cool idea. It's like, oh, man, the bear, the Russian bear, the symbol. It's like everything starts to collide, and it's like, first comes the idea.
Well, every little helps, and we can do every little we can to help in conflict situations around the world, including in Nigeria. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi. Bye for now.